Welcome to Business 454 and our discussion around scope. I call this the scope mini lecture. We will get into why scoping is very important, since during the first week of your engagement in this class, your clients are going to ask for you to put together and refine a scope of work. Right now, your clients have a description of the projects that they envision. However, in reality, clients sometimes ask a whole lot more than it can be realistically delivered. What's important about this presentation and the scoping process, which is always a challenge, is that it'll allow you to be able to manage expectations. And you can apply this learning to a lot of things in life, whether it be with your boss, your roommates, your significant other or spouse, and your kids when you have them as well. So, with that, let's move on. So, the problem with most consulting projects, and this is what I've had to deal with over the last 18 years, is that the clients can be all over the place. And sometimes you feel like you're asked to do 20 different things, and you're not being very efficient and focused and being able to get the primary deliverable that is needed done. And Robert Solomon will talk a little bit about this in terms of in his book, The Art of Client Service. But you want to make sure you take care of the client, but you also need to know what the client really needs. And I think the scoping process can help prioritize, and that's a key word. Prioritize what the needs are so you can manage those expectations and deliver value at the end of the day. It's better to underpromise and overdeliver than to overpromise and then underdeliver and have a client upset because of the quality or the time, I'm going to say the lack of timeliness. So that's why we need a tight scope, to be on target with the client needs, but also to successfully deliver. Remember, that client wants the Lamborghini, but realistically what you can deliver is the Yugo. And so you need to keep that in perspective as you talk with your clients and you hone in on what is the priority, what is the big key question that we need to address at this point. Because the client is probably envisioned, such as we have with the Paso Robles Chamber of Commerce, unbelievably large project. But the reality is that there may be some priorities that we need to focus in on to be able to get done well within the quarter, and then to be able to build on those priorities into future engagements. And you have to remember, the reason why this is important is that most projects have three constraints: time, cost, and scope. And one of the things that clients hate on a project is if they go really broad and next thing you know, they're changing the scope and they find the project doesn't complete on time, they're upset. Or the project costs now are up 25%. They're not upset. There's a fourth piece in this puzzle that I haven't touched on, and that's quality. Okay? So there are these three key pieces: scope, time, and cost. But there is also that fourth piece that we need to keep in mind, is the quality piece as well. So what's in a good scope? And this is something, take note of this, FOD. Okay, this will be in the rubric for the first presentation. So I will be looking at the frame. We'll talk a little bit about the frame, the objectives, and the deliverables in the next few slides. These things need to be clearly defined. So what is about a frame? A frame is, I like to use, are we solving the right problem? And I'll use this example. This was actually from an article that we discussed up at Berkeley this summer. And it was asking, are we solving the right problems? And it is an art. Many times in business, we just leapfrog to a solution. The entrepreneurs leapfrog, jumped straight to a product. Sort of reel it back for a second. And in this article, they gave an example. The author gave an example. And what the author said was, hey, we have the scenario where you're our building owner. and there have been complaints that the elevator, quote unquote, is too slow. So the natural reaction is to go to solution and make it faster. Okay, well, new lift, motor, improve the algorithm. That costs a lot of money. So sometimes you reframe the problem. And one of the issues may not necessarily be that the perception of the elevator is too slow, but maybe what in reframing the problem, because when you think about it, it's not the elevator ride that's slow, but it is actually what people are most annoyed, and think about yourself, is having to wait for the elevator. That the wait is annoying. So now we're into what we call a classic queuing problem. So what we know from operations management examples is if you approach the queuing problem in terms of creating distractions, guess what? The wait is seen to be less. So this is one of the alternative ways of reframing the problem that is there and providing a more cost-effective solution. And think about it yourself. If you have a mirror in front or by the elevator and you're waiting, you probably go and check yourself out. You got a big interview, you want to make sure your tie is straight and makeup is for gals is not fudged or smudged, and your hair looks really good. People do that. It's actually just a very natural human instinct. So when you're doing that, all of a sudden you're not really thinking about the wait because you have something to do. Or even with the hand sanitizer, I love that because you're doing something, and when you do something, all of a sudden the wait doesn't feel like a big wait. We did something like this for a consulting engagement for a major cancer center. The charge originally was a very broad-based charge that I had 3 PhDs on the team. We were starting to do an unbelievable amount of research, but the amount of work that was being looked at and what we would have to present would lead to a full-day educational event. But then we sort of took a step back and we asked, who's the customer? The customer is the chief operating officer. What does this person care about? Who cares about the operations? Who cares about competition? The position of the cancer center? So we flipped the scope on its head. And said, maybe the question should be, what should Moffitt be doing? And we gave a different time frame in terms of this. And we said next 2 years or 3 years, because it's much more actionable in terms of research we can do, to create a competitive advantage. So I think they were thinking about that issue in terms of the pipeline, because in cancer centers, it's what drugs, what research you're doing that make you attractive as a major, we'll call it National Comprehensive Cancer Center. So we talked about framing, and this is very critical. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind when you do share with me your FOD, I'm going to be looking for what is the key question. Okay? And that's going to tie to another piece which we'll talk later on about SCQR, which is situation, complication, question, and recommendation. So question is very, very important. You want to get it tight because it'll allow you then to be able to go forth in terms of recommendation and actually what objectives you're going to set and what deliverables you're going to provide. It's very strategic in nature. So objectives are action statements to define specifically what you're going to do. So I'll be looking for that in your presentation, in your first presentation. To do this, explore that, identify. And they are SMART. So you've probably been exposed to SMART. So just keep in mind, I want to make sure they're specific, they're measurable, they're realistically attainable, and they're relevant to the project, and there's a time basis for it. Not nothing that's really broad based that you can't put your I'm going to say your arms around. Okay, something that's very, very smart is going to be something then you be very concrete to then drive deliverables. So that gets the next issue, which is the D, which is deliverables. And that includes your research data, marketing plan, brand profile, marketing campaign. It might be a social media set of deliverables that are there that you agree upon. So these are things that flow out of your objectives, which flow and connect to your frame. Okay? And the deliverables are what are agreed upon work projects. and work products. And they're something that you want to make sure that we stay focused on. I've had situations where clients start shifting the scope even in midterm, and that needs to be a point of discussion, okay? Because it just in terms of use of your time and effort, and what happens is if we have to shift, which sometimes does happen in the real world, so we have to be flexible. But what happens is that there's a trade-off. It means I may not be able to do as much to deliver. I may not be able to get all these things in on time. There may be in our business when we do that and then something's added on. Case example, they wanted legal contracts for us to provide for advisory boards that we're doing this fall. And that was not in the original scope of work, so we had to add that in. We were happy to do that, but we had to pass through the legal fees. We also had to pass through our time and effort in managing that need. So when we get to D and O, so if we look at O being the milestones, there's certain key things that you're looking like. Okay, to obtain a permit, okay, to start building by a certain time, and then to start moving into the house as key objectives that we wish to accomplish, which are milestones, okay, because they're time-based, okay, in building the house. Therefore, the deliverables on the right-hand side talk about for applying to, we got to have deliverables being architectural drawings. The starting the building process, the deliverable that comes out of that process is going to be the building. And then moving into the house, okay, that means I got to have the kitchen and the finished work done. So deliverables are the outputs that we want. And this is just to sort of close out. I have one or two examples in the real world. This is some market research that I did for a company up in San Jose. And as you can see, what I've done is I've defined out some specific objectives. And usually my frame is, a little of a company situation, which is this company who had an active pharmaceutical ingredient with a new delivery system, which was actually a patch-based delivery system, and they were wanting to know, what is the appropriate indication that we should lead with for this new product. And they were really debating between three different areas: opioid abuse, overdose, and pruritus. And so what I had to do is define some specific objectives that drove deliverables, such as doing secondary research to be able to establish a foundation. So secondary research led to a presentation and a report. Okay. The second objective is to identify potential positioning and messaging opportunities. And then the third objective was gaining voice of customer input. So I then had market research where I did one-on-one interviews with key customers around the topic area, and then ended up with a deliverable that came out in terms of a final presentation. And you can see in the scope of work, we get specific, because being specific manages the client expectation of what we're going to deliver, one. But number two is how we can price out a project and also estimate when the project deliverables will be delivered. This example is with another company, and I do some writing in medical writing space, and I had a client who basically wanted 2 manuscripts done, and they were in these dealing with, I'll say, early clinical, preclinical work. And the client didn't necessarily want to pay what my usual customary fee is for writing. And the client was a startup, so they were budget constrained. So what I did was I said, this is what we will do. We'll review materials, we'll develop outline, we'll run drafts through outside editor, we'll do 2 drafts to meet that. And that's it. So if you want it submitted, that's going to be outside the scope of work, and we'll charge for that. If you want to deal with peer review, we'll have that outside of scope of work. So it allows for a fairness, and if there's something that moves beyond, say, 2 rounds of review, it's not uncommon to have 3 rounds of review with clients. that becomes something that says, we're more than happy to accommodate, but then there's a cost implication or a time implication there. So it helps in managing the expectations here. So hopefully out of this lecture you've been able to gain some insights as to what will be requested in your first presentation, but also in terms of how you're going to go about in interacting with your client to be able to focus down what the scope of work is so that you can be able to timely, quality-wise, be able to deliver great deliverables. So with that, I certainly hope that gives you background. Viewing this video allows us to have a little bit more time in class to have a little Q&A on the issue, as well as to be able to focus in on team choose up, and then also in terms of getting that first letter out that is so critical to the client. Okay, thank you and have a great day. So here's the bottom line, FOD equals project success.